We all know this guy. He's the good one at work, helpful, warm, the colleague everyone genuinely likes. He covers your shifts, steps aside so you can go ahead, and never makes it about himself. And yet, year after year, he watches a sharp-elbowed, less likeable colleague take the credit, get the pay rise and the promotion he quietly earned. In our last episode, I promised to reveal a personality trait with a genuinely surprising link to your salary. This is it, because the uncomfortable truth, backed by decades of robust psychological research, is that being too nice has a literal price. It's measured in pounds and promotions, and the data show it actually hits men the hardest. Now, if you're nodding along thinking, right, so I just need to start acting like a bastard, slow down. This is one of the most misunderstood traits in the Big Five, and that simple conclusion is dead wrong. The trait is agreeableness. To truly master it, we have to talk honestly about something everyone praises but almost nobody actually understands: empathy. I'm Dr Nick Keca, and this is episode 5. It's a deeper dive today because there's a lot here worth getting right. By the end of this episode, you'll understand the mechanics of the nice guy penalty, how raw empathy misleads and burns you out, and the exact psychological profile that beats both the pushover and the jerk. Let's get into it. Every personality trait has a bright side and a dark side, but agreeableness is the one where the simple binary, nice equals good, mean equals bad, shatters completely. It's the most conceptually misunderstood of the Big Five, and here's why. Personality traits are normally distributed along a bell curve. This carries a profound implication that most people completely miss, and it's this. There are distinct evolutionary advantages and disadvantages at every single position on that scale. Yes, even the positions that sound purely negative. Here's the proof. If low agreeableness, being skeptical, tough, and fiercely competitive, was just a psychological defect, evolution would have weeded it out millennia ago. It didn't. The disagreeable end of the spectrum has persisted across all human populations for a reason. It confers massive advantages. It drives success in competition, leverage in negotiation, authority in leadership, and a distinct boost in lifetime earnings. Most importantly, it gives you the plain ability to defend your own boundaries without drowning in guilt. So, we aren't going to look at this superficially today. This isn't about telling you to be nicer or be tougher. We're doing something far more useful, mapping out exactly what this trait costs you and what it earns you, and how to deliberately choose which version of yourself a specific moment demands. At its absolute core, agreeableness answers one fundamental social question. How much should you weigh other people's interests against your own? High scorers are warm, cooperative, trusting and forgiving. They're deeply, genuinely concerned for others, and they'll invest in relationships even at heavy personal cost. Low scorers are direct, competitive, skeptical and hard-headed. They're willing, without much agonizing, to put themselves first. The evolutionary picture makes total sense of this, and it's worth sitting with. Agreeable people are structurally built to care for the dependent and the vulnerable, the infant, the sick, the elderly. Their entire psychological disposition is finely tuned to put the other person first. Disagreeable people, on the other hand, are built for a competitive, zero-sum world. They're perfectly adapted to pursue their own interests, especially when resources are heavily contested. Neither version of this trait is good or bad. They're simply two entirely different solutions to two distinctly historical problems: how to care and how to compete. While most of us sit somewhere along the bell curve between them, crucially every single one of us carries a capacity for both. But let's make one quick correction before we go deeper, because this trips people up constantly. Agreeableness is not the same as happiness, and it isn't the same as being fun. That's a different trait. The extrovert brings the social energy and the laughs. The agreeable person, they actually like you. They care about your welfare, the specific person sitting right in front of them. That warm, localised care is the true heartbeat of this trait. If you look just one level down, agreeableness splits into two distinct aspects that are actually completely different behavioural engines. Compassion, the warm, empathy-driven care for other people's feelings and welfare. And politeness, respect for decorum, restraint of aggression, deference to authority and a deep dislike of imposing on others. Here's why separating them matters. They can diverge completely. You can be fiercely compassionate but incredibly low in politeness. This is the whistleblower or the advocate, the person who cares so deeply about a vulnerable colleague that they'll happily smash the rules and challenge the CEO to protect them. On the flip side, you can be impeccably polite, never rude, never pushy, flawless manners, yet completely detached and emotionally cold underneath the etiquette. There's a crucial way to think about compassion that directly impacts your bank account. It's fundamentally a negotiating stance. The more compassionate you are, the more you instinctively negotiate on behalf of the other person instead of yourself. That's great when the other party genuinely cannot fight for themselves, like a child or a patient. But it becomes a massive professional liability when you're dealing with a competitor who will simply pocket every concession you make. One quick, neutral data point here because it's fascinating. These two subtraits map cleanly onto political differences. On average, left-leaning individuals score slightly higher on compassion, while right-leaning individuals score slightly higher on politeness. It's the exact same major trait, but it opens two entirely different doors and worldviews. Beneath those two broad aspects sit 6 highly granular facets. In this section, we're going to break down the first 3, the ones that form the compassionate, trusting core of this trait. First up is trust. This is your default setting, the baseline assumption that other people are fundamentally honest and well-intentioned. High trust is a social grease that makes collaboration effortless, but its low pole, guarded skepticism isn't just a defect. While it can be corrosive among friends, it's genuinely adapted in high-stakes, adversarial settings such as a tough contract negotiation or a rigorous due diligence meeting. Next up is straightforwardness. This is pure frankness and sincerity, a complete reluctance to flatter, scheme or manipulate. Pay close attention to the bottom end of this scale because this is where things get dangerous. Low straightforwardness is manipulativeness, and it sits right at the dead centre of the dark corporate traits we broke down in the previous series. The smooth corporate manipulator is, by definition, operating at the extreme low end of agreeableness. The third is altruism. This is an active, willing concern for others, expressed through concrete action. It's the engine behind all this discretionary effort, the quiet favours, the mentoring, the staying late to help a struggling teammate. It's the unseen glue keeping teams running far beyond anyone's formal job description, and it's one of the most valuable assets a professional can bring to a group. Look closely at how distinct these 3 dials actually are. A leader can be exceptionally high in altruism, endlessly helpful, yet bottom out on trust, meaning they will bend over backwards to help you while quietly assuming the absolute worst of your motives. Another person can be scrupulously straightforward, yet entirely cold and devoid of any warmth. Your personality isn't one giant bucket labelled nice. These are entirely separate behavioural dials, and exactly where your dials are set dictates everything about how you navigate the workplace and how you're treated in return. While the first 3 facets govern your warmth, the final 3 dictate exactly how you handle yourself in conflict and status. Let's start with the big one, compliance. This is the core variable for everything we're breaking down today. It defines how you navigate interpersonal friction. High scorers defer, yield and forgive. Low scorers compete, push back and fiercely defend their corner. And here's the trap. Extreme compliance is precisely what makes a person exploitable. The colleague who always backs down isn't demonstrating a virtue, They're actively training everyone around them to expect submission. Next is modesty. This is your default level of humility regarding your own merits. Its low pole is self-promotion and grandiosity, the wide open door to narcissism. While a healthy dose of modesty is gracious, too much of it acts like a professional invisibility cloak. You'll never articulate what you're actually worth. Finally, tender-mindedness. This is sympathy grounded purely in emotion, making social decisions from the heart rather than from objective metrics or cold logic. In a moment, we'll see exactly why this specific dial is where raw empathy quietly leads good people astray. This brings us to the ultimate synthesis of all 6 facets, and it's arguably the most important takeaway of this entire series. The traits that make you a trusted, generous colleague, altruism and trust, are fundamentally distinct from the trait that makes you a doormat, high compliance. The most highly effective leaders remain high on trust and altruism, yet retain the psychological agility to drop low on compliance, the exact second a situation demands it. Mastering that single distinction is the entire game. Now for the deep dive that I think matters most. Empathy is arguably the most praised and least understood word in modern life. We treat it like a single, uniform virtue that you simply have more or less of. But it isn't one thing, it's at least 3 entirely different mechanisms, and they can come apart completely. The first is affective empathy, or feeling with. You see someone in pain and you absorb a version of that pain yourself. Their distress becomes your distress. This is what most people actually mean when they say the word empathy, and it's fundamentally a form of emotional contagion. Second is cognitive empathy, or understanding. This is a perspective taking. It's the cold, clinical capacity to accurately map out what's going on in someone else's mind, what they're feeling and why, without necessarily feeling a single drop of it yourself. It's a skill, and it's much closer to social intelligence. Third is compassion, or caring. This isn't absorbing the other person's suffering, it's feeling for them, it's warmth, genuine concern, and the intrinsic motivation to actually help. As Singer and Klimecki put it, compassion is feeling for the other, not feeling with them. Why does this distinction matter? Because the compassion aspect of agreeableness is closest to that third element, warm, proactive care. But when we use the word empathy casually, it almost always smuggles in the first element, raw emotional contagion. As we're about to see, these 3 forces are not equally good. In fact, the very mechanism the world celebrates most is the one that most often leads us astray. Here's the uncomfortable case against raw affective empathy, and it's an argument backed by some of the most serious minds in psychology. Think of affective empathy as a spotlight. It shines intensely on the one person right in front of you, but it leaves everyone else outside the beam completely in the dark. This narrow focus makes empathy deeply biased. We naturally feel a massive wave of concern for a single named, pictured child, while remaining emotionally numb to a statistic of thousands suffering from the exact same crisis. Empathy is innumerate. It simply cannot do arithmetic with human suffering. As psychologist Paul Bloom points out, it pulls our charity, our attention, and even our institutional policies toward whoever has the most vivid face, not whoever has the greatest need. It masquerades as the ultimate moral virtue, but it quietly produces deeply unfair decisions. Second, raw empathy burns you out. When you spend your days absorbing other people's psychological pain, it's deeply corrosive. There's a reason the caring professions suffer from such catastrophic rates of burnout. The neurological research here is striking. Individuals trained purely in empathy show massive distress and negative brain activation on scans. But those trained in compassion, warm care paired with the motivation to help, show positive emotions, heightened resilience, and a markedly greater willingness to help. Caring sustains you. Drowning in someone else's feelings destroys you. Third, and this is the darkest, remember cognitive empathy? The clinical skill of reading people. If you detach that skill from genuine care, you don't get a saint, you get a predator. Con artists, corporate psychopaths, and malignant manipulators often read people superbly. They know exactly what you feel, they simply don't care. High cognitive empathy paired with low compassion and low agreeableness is the exact corporate toolkit of the dark empath. In this sense, empathy is a high voltage power tool, and like any power tool, it can build a culture or tear it to pieces. So the takeaway isn't to stop caring, it's to aim for warmth, deliberate compassion guided by objective reason, not raw uncalibrated emotional contagion. Feel for people, help them wisely, and never mistake drowning in someone else's feelings for virtue. So, let's answer the ultimate question with the actual empirical evidence. Do nice guys really finish last? In specific, measurable, and financially devastating respects, yes. The landmark study on this ran 4 separate trials, and the findings were entirely consistent. Agreeableness is negatively correlated with income. More agreeable people simply earn less money. They negotiate less aggressively for themselves, and they advance far more slowly into senior leadership roles. This phenomenon is robust enough to have an official psychological name, the agreeableness penalty. This isn't an isolated finding. A massive meta-analysis of personality and earnings confirmed the exact same reality across the literature. On average, high agreeableness systematically erodes your lifetime pay. But here's the part that should deeply concern every man watching. This financial penalty hits men significantly harder than women. An agreeable man pays a vastly steeper professional price for his niceness. In the original data, highly agreeable men earned roughly 18% less than their highly disagreeable peers, with subsequent analyses putting this income gap even higher. Don't get bogged down in the exact percentage, focus on the direction and the trend's terrifying robustness. Why does this gap exist? The researchers pointed directly to social backlash. We carry a deeply rooted, often unspoken societal expectation that men should be assertive, competitive and tough. A disagreeable man perfectly matches that stereotype, so we read his behaviour as strong negotiation and leadership material. An agreeable man violates his stereotype. As a result, he's quietly written off as soft, a pushover, and distinctly not executive material. He isn't being penalised for his kindness, he's being penalised for failing to look like the archetypal male leader. The underlying engine connects right back to what we established earlier. Compassion is a negotiating stance. When an agreeable man sits across a boardroom table, he's instinctively negotiating on the other party's half. He finds fierce self-advocacy genuinely uncomfortable, choosing instead to take one for the team. Of course, he leaves massive amounts of money and career progression on the table. He was, in a very real sense, playing for the opposing team the entire time. So, is the ultimate lesson just to become a ruthless shark and rake in the cash? No, absolutely not. Because the disagreeable end of the spectrum comes with its own brutal hidden bill, and it's incredibly easy to miss if you're only auditing your own salary. Highly disagreeable people impose massive psychological and economic costs on everyone around them. The organisational research on what's known as the bad apple effect is sobering. A single toxic team member, whether they're a chronic cynic, a bully or an information withholder, can drag an entire group's performance down by 30 to 40%. Look at that figure as an indicative benchmark rather than a fixed law, but the reality remains absolute. One toxic individual can poison a healthy ecosystem. The professional who wins individual promotions by being a jerk is often quietly destroying the collective value of the entire department, and eventually that tax lands on the organisation. But it gets worse if we look at leadership in the opposite direction. Excess agreeableness in a leader is genuinely dangerous. An overly nice leader cannot deliver hard feedback, refuses to hold people accountable, and lets chronic underperformance slide just to avoid a brief moment of interpersonal discomfort. When that happens, the whole team's standards quietly rot from the inside out. This means both behavioural extremes fail. The doormat gets exploited, the bully poisons the well, and the over-nice leader presides over organisational decay. There's a crucial line worth holding on to here. There's a world of difference between disagreeing and being disagreeable. You can challenge ideas fiercely, hold your position, and absolutely refuse to be rolled over, while remaining a fundamentally decent human being. Disagreeing is a strategic behaviour you actively choose in the moment. Being disagreeable is a structural flaw in how you treat people. Your goal is to master the first without ever falling into the second. Now let's give agreeableness its proper due. Because after looking at the income penalties, it's easy to walk away thinking it's just a strategic liability you need to minimise. It absolutely is not. It's one of the most profoundly valuable things a human being can bring to a collective group. Agreeableness is the single strongest Big Five predictor of team cohesion. It's the social glue that holds a group together, allowing people to navigate inevitable structural friction without tearing the team apart. Highly agreeable people build trust. They systematically create a psychological safety, the exact cultural conditions where someone feels safe to admit a failure, raise an urgent concern, or float a half-baked creative idea entirely without fear. They do the vital organisational citizenship work that no formal job description ever captures, and in doing so they lift everyone's well-being, their own included. Think about who you actually want to stand next to you when things get tough, or when a project goes off the rails. It isn't the most charismatic extrovert, and it isn't the highest earner. It's the warm one, the person who genuinely cares about you, the specific human being sitting right in front of them. That proactive kindness is a distinctive gift of this trait. A world entirely devoid of it might be highly efficient and ruthlessly competitive, but it will be utterly unbearable. The strategic goal was never to stamp out your agreeableness. The goal is simply to stop it from being used against you. And the empirical evidence squarely backs this value. The most comprehensive recent meta-analytic review pulled data across an immense body of literature and concluded that the overwhelming majority of its measured consequences run in a highly desirable direction for cooperation, functional relationships, and systemic well-being. This isn't a soft, optional corporate luxury. In any environment that fundamentally depends on human beings trusting and helping one another, which is practically all of them, agreeableness is absolutely load-bearing. So, how do you actually apply all of this in the real world? It comes down to the core thesis of this entire series. The situation must dictate which version of you shows up. Compassion is the correct tactical stance when the other party genuinely cannot advocate for themselves or directly depends on you. Think of the struggling junior team member, a client experiencing hardship, or a loved one who's had a devastating week. Switched on fully there, that's exactly what that psychological engine is built for. But deployment is everything. That exact same compassion, when weaponized against a competitive counterpart, a hardball negotiator, a commercial rival, or someone who will simply pocket your concessions and demand more, is no longer a virtue, it's just a strategic failure. In those situations, you must possess the agility to drop into a firmer mode, crystal clear about your own interests, entirely comfortable with interpersonal discomfort, and willing to say a definitive no without a single apology. Finally, if you're leading an organisation, here are your two core directives. Address the bad apples, because a single sufficiently disagreeable individual can sink an entire group's performance. Toxicity is something you must actively manage. Never tolerate. Build your accountability muscle. If your baseline agreeableness is high, It's the single biggest obstacle to delivering hard feedback and maintaining elite standards. That's the exact psychological muscle you have to consciously train. So, the psychological profile that actually wins in the real world isn't at either extreme. It isn't maximal niceness, and it certainly isn't calculated coldness. It's the rare capacity to be warm and firm by terms suited to the situation. It means being genuinely kind, generous and trusting as your baseline default, while retaining the absolute ability to plant your feet, defend your corner, and deliver a clear, calm no in the exact moment the situation demands it. Here's the liberating truth for the nice guy we've talked about at the very beginning. The asset you're missing isn't compassion, you've got plenty of that. What you lack is assertiveness. And assertiveness is just a skill, not a personality transplant. You can learn to articulate what you're worth, protect a boundary, and disagree firmly without losing a single ounce of the human warmth that makes people trust you in the first place. You don't have to become a ruthless cynic, you just have to stop being so easy to walk past. Be the kind one, stay the kind one. Just stop being so busy negotiating everyone else's case that you completely forget to advocate for your own. If you want one concrete, high-impact place to start today, it's this. The next time something truly matters to you, ask for it plainly, once, then stay quiet. Don't rush to soften it, don't scramble to justify it, don't reflexively hand concessions back just to break the tension. That single held silence with the warmth still in your eyes is 80% of assertiveness. You aren't becoming hard, you're simply stopping yourself mid-apology for daring to want something in the first place. Let's end with an honest self-audit. Where do you actually sit on the spectrum? Are you naturally warm and accommodating, or tough and self-interested? Look closer at your sub-traits. Which aspect leads the charge? Is it the compassion that actively cares, or the politeness that defers to authority and avoids conflict at all costs? Be painfully honest with yourself about that high compliance style, the one that triggers you to back down by reflex while telling yourself you're just being a good guy. Now for the real questions. Where is your kindness genuinely serving as a gift? And where is it actively costing you money, respect, and your own strategic interests? Is your empathy the warm, calibrated kind that helps people wisely, or the overwhelming, uncalibrated kind that's burning you out? And where specifically do you need to cultivate the capacity to be exceptionally firm without ever needing to be cruel? A quick reminder, as always, this framework is a map, not a final verdict. This is education, not a clinical diagnosis. In our next episode, we reach a final dimension of the Big Five series, trait openness. This is a trait of imagination, abstract ideas, and the unconventional mind. It's the only dimension with a direct link to intelligence, acting as the absolute engine behind every creative leap, and every half-finished project you've ever started. Openness sets up exactly where this entire series has been heading, the ultimate question of whether you can actually change who you are. If this was useful, and especially if you recognise your own reflection in that person from our opening episode, hit like and subscribe. And do me a favour, tell me in the comments below if your niceness has ever cost you a promotion or a paycheck. I read every single comment. The full written article and breakdown, complete with all of the academic references, is over on my website. The address is on the screen now and linked in the description below. I'm Dr Nick Keca. I'll see you in episode 6.